Let's do it.
Gentlemen, it's been a while. It's good to see you. Thanks for doing this today. And I'll preface everything by saying that Matt Hill was supposed to be here as well, but I fat fingered the invite, and as a result, he got caught in a winter storm. So we'll have to get him. If we do this again, we'll have to get him back.
For sure.
So how you guys doing? How's the year been? It's been eventful to say the least.
Really?
In a non-boring year.
Boring year.
Sorry, go ahead, Alex.
I was gonna say the same thing. I think we were making the same joke.
Yes, it was eventful.
What do you think? I mean, what's been I don't know if highlight's the right word, but Alex, maybe you go first. What's been the highlight or most interesting or exciting or whatever point for you?
I mean, I think for me, it's been such a validating year for River's thesis, which is focus exclusively on Bitcoin. Don't take risks doing financial products and, funny business that we don't really understand. And, frankly, I thought, a lot of these companies that were zooming past us, like FTX and BlockFi, I thought, there was a little part of me that thought, oh, maybe these guys are just smarter than we are. Like maybe there's something I don't really understand here, but I just don't get it. And it's been a very validating year that there wasn't something I didn't understand. I did understand it, and I just made the right decision. So that was probably, I don't want to say a highlight because a lot of people were hurt from all of this, but it was certainly validation.
Did you? I mean, surely you didn't think that you had just gotten the thesis wrong. I mean, I presume you just thought that these guys were going after hot, risky money and that it would all kind of crash around them at some point. But I mean, is that correct? Or were you starting to doubt the overarching thesis?
No, I wasn't doubting our thesis of focusing on Bitcoin. But there was sort of like this open question of like, what financial products makes sense in a Bitcoin world, right? And like, collateralized lending on Bitcoin isn't like wacky. It's not like super crazy, but that was sort of like an open question. Like, is that something, like, are we missing an opportunity with that? Like, is that something that makes sense? And we never shipped it because it always seemed kind of not quite right. And yeah, so it's more like stuff like that. We were never going to offer like, really insane things.
Right. I mean, what do you think? What are your reservations about that one in particular? Because, all the Celsius and FTX and DeFi garbage, there's a lot more wrapped up in it than just collateralized Bitcoin lending, right? And, what is your main issue with that particular product?
Well, I actually don't have an issue with, fully collateralized, lending as a product. If you're holding the Bitcoin, you're not rehypothecating it, you're lending dollars against it. That's actually extremely safe. But is it a good business? Is sort of also like this open question, because the interest rates you have to charge on that are, without rehypothecating the Bitcoin, right? The money typically in collateralized lending on Bitcoin isn't rehypothecating the Bitcoin. So
right.
You're doing full reserve collateralized lending, like you have to charge pretty high interest rates to make any money. And then it really becomes like a sort of an open question of like, how many people actually want this? Especially like if you're like wealthier and the money comes from the big loans. And so if you're wealthier, you probably have access to like really cheap debt or way cheaper debt than you could get through a Bitcoin collateralized loan that's not being rehypothecated. So, stuff like it's basically like, they're just like interesting business questions there.
Right. And did you do some market research, or how did you figure out that it just wasn't going to be sufficiently profitable, let's say, to move forward on?
I mean, yeah, it's not that, like, there's a world where it is someday. It's just, we decided like it's a lot of work to build new financial products, right? And we decided there's already plenty of room to improve what we already have, instead of spreading ourselves thin and doing something new. Just doing what we knew people 100% wanted, which is brokerage, custody, mining, lightning. So really just also just like a resource-based decision, like, and focus.
Right.
Doing more things is It's a lot.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll come back to one of the points you hit on in a sec. But MVK, what's been the highlight for you?
Yeah, I mean, definitely a non-boring year. I think like two major sort of realizations this year. One is this was the validation of the grub brain year. I think everybody who played it dumb, simple, try not to be smart, like had their coins saved. Everybody who tried to be smart, thought that they could outsmart, you know, quite brilliant scammers out there. A lot of financialization of everything, a lot of complicated words, a lot of complicated math got wrecked. I know good people who like some of the products, some of the things looked they were safe at face value. They didn't understand the extent of the risk in third, fourth, fifth order of risk, right, and other liabilities. Because like there were illegal things done. It's not even that people could catch and understand the level of financialization that was happening, right? What happened was essentially a 2008 moment in the crypto space.
Mm.
People didn't understand the repackaging of this toxic leverage, right, in multiple layers. So if you just follow the grub brain, right, and like Bitcoin stored good, Bitcoin not stored not good, right? Like you did well. You really did well. Like uh, I think we have a fiat mind disease problem still in the space, and even within all of us, because we've been sort of uh, uh, conditioned to think this way. We think that count go up is more important than number go up, and we need to deprogram that. We need to understand um, wealth preservation is more important than wealth aggregation. So Bitcoin's deflationary property takes care of your wealth value going up. You don't need to accrue interest on your coins in order to find financial sovereignty and increase your wealth value in the future, right?
Mhm.
So it's all about sort of like really going extra fucking dumb, and being very sort of defensive of the pile and not doing anything with the pile as much as you can. Um, and uh, so so that's one sort of like lesson, and sort of like like I think more like affirmation of this mentality that happened this year. I think this was like pretty awesome. And then the other thing is like it's just I've never seen a bear market in all the bear markets I've been in where you have so much action, you have so many people buying your products, you have so many people building, you have so much capital available. It's almost like we are in this cathedral here and the whole city's on fire, right? Like everything is fucking burning down around us, but like we're in this like beautiful little spot where like we're just sort of like totally able to build, capitalize, like learn, and like it's just amazing. So I think like these two things combined made this year be very special.
Do you think that's like attributed to, well, obviously more smart money, I guess, being in the space, but like, is this the beginning of the separation, the beginning of the like uncorrelatedness, even though the price of Bitcoin has been down? But as you say, like there's investment capital available, there's lots of building. Like, what do you attribute that being the circumstance this time
We
around?
haven't
And
even started with the scams. So I guarantee you that somebody right now at A16Z just invented the 1000x scam for the next cycle. And it's going to be bigger than anything else you have ever seen before. And we're going to have many cycles like that. Like, fiat is too big, right? It's like there's 8 billion people dependent on the fiat system, the fiat mindset. And then there is, the small amount of people who own that market, and they're gonna like milk it for quite some time still. There's a lot of inertia on their side, right? So And another problem too is that the biggest pockets in Bitcoin, right, are still fiat-minded people. So every new cycle, the new pockets that come in are still of a certain cohort of fiat people. So right now, this last cycle, we had the equities people come in, right? So they traded Bitcoin like an equity, therefore Bitcoin behaves like an equity. It looks fully correlated, right? So I think the next cycle is going to be very similar. Um, listen, we never know. You know, the Saudis are bidding, kind of like joke. You just don't know. But I still think that a lot of the money coming in is like that, and they need to be, they need a loss on the balance sheet to sort of understand, and some of them will stick around. These losses are still very small relative to their pockets. Even the
Yeah.
people who lost money on FTX, except for Tom Brady. That was a nice hit there. I think a lot
Do
of
you
the
know how
investors
much
there.
he was invested in the equity of that?
I think he invested him and Giselle 650 mil was all their wealth.
I don't believe that.
Yeah, I
I
have a
don't
hard
I
buy
time
that.
believe
believing
it.
It
that
doesn't make
too.
any sense. I would bet. I don't know. I would bet Tom Brady just got paid like some cash and a bunch of equity for doing his like ads. I would be shocked if he put in large sums of money
So
himself into FTX.
Yeah, I'm kind of in
here's
that camp.
here's one thing FTX had is they had the regulator vibe, the regulated vibe, the sort of like white guy who speaks English vibe, the A16Z behind. They had all the checkbox for people to just fucking go like
Ape.
full deposit, right? I know companies who had like the majority of their funds sitting there because it was a fantastic trading engine. It was great because there was all IOU. It's a lot easier to trade IOU. Like they actually had very good technology on the trading side, right? So all these entities were like just full deposit there, even if they were not like gambling. So I can see how guys like that are not as sophisticated in high finance, sort of like going, and sort of like, hey, this is amazing. Look, this kid is amazing. I'm just gonna like put more in, and then
But where did that figure come from? Is that just like Twitter news?
I think
I
was
think that's Twitter.
reported.
It's
I
what?
think was more than Twitter. I think was reported in a few mainstream outlets.
Man, that would be rough. Because I mean, I can
There is
see
a cap
Sam.
table. I think it's on the
It's
cap table actually.
I
How
think
that
it's
got
fake.
paid out or bought out is a different story. But it might have been, I think, on their cap table of like whatever. It was a super complicated entity too.
Yeah. Well, before we move on to that whole debacle, just on the last point, like what do you attribute if you say, because it's basically, I was thinking about it just, on a run the other day, and it's pretty much an evergreen statement to say we're so fucking early. Like we all forget how early we are because we're so in the weeds in this stuff. And so you're probably right that there will be another cycle and another cycle and another cycle full of scams and full of fiat thinking and full of all the rest of it. But what do you attribute? Because you mentioned that like this time funding hasn't dried up as much and there's a lot of activity and things always get built in the bear market. But why do you think this one, what makes this one different?
Math. So you have a whatever, like 400 trillion market of like people that want to invest their money, right? That's distributed across all asset classes, right? And then like this cycle we managed to scrape off of that just like couple $100 billion, right?
Mm.
And that's enough to like make this space be a big boom in terms of like having like it's not like we have thousands of Bitcoin companies, right? We have hundreds. So like it's a lot easier to divvy up that pie and find investment within that pie because it's just so hard to convey and represent the size of the money market in the world. Like it's just crazy, 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 crazy big.
Mm.
Think
I mean,
about
I
it
think
this
there's.
way. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Um, you know, if you just get like the top 10 sort of like private funds out there, right? So like wealthy families and sort of like completely private stuff, right? I mean, all just those funds are like probably 100 times the size of Bitcoin at the peak.
Hmm.
And that's like, you know, like 50 people that fit in a room. It's just so much money out there. This all was really caused in the last, say, 30 years, right? There was not that much, like the figures were like, you know, a million times smaller 30 years ago. Like this is all the money printing did this, right?
Hmm.
It's just that this got aggregated into financialized products that are really owned by very sort of like a small subset of the market. But anyways, just the numbers are ginormous. So if we just by the sheer math of dividing the stuff up, we get a cut.
On that point, have you guys, because you're both, consumer facing and stuff, what kind of impact have you guys seen as a result of the so-called beer market?
So on our end, volumes are definitely down, as they are across the industry for buying Bitcoin. The big money isn't showing up like it used to, but numbers are up. So like we're hitting record highs for number of orders. So what we're seeing is basically, more
Plebs.
people are interested, but the whales like aren't aping in anymore.
Mhm.
But yeah, I'd be curious but it sounds like hardware sales are actually really doing well. So I don't know if you're seeing that.
So it's kind of fascinating. This Black Friday was about a third of last year's Black Friday, right? Which is already pretty amazing to me because it's just a complete burning down Black Friday, like all-time low at the same time of Black Friday, right? So there's no retail coming into Bitcoin as new users to buy new hardware. But the 2 weeks leading up to it, with all the essentially everybody realizing, even mainstream starting to say not your keys, not your coin, made up for those sales of last year. So we have a November that looks almost the same as last year's November at a top at an all-time
Wow.
high. It's crazy that like we will probably be, say, about 20%, 25% total revenue less than last year. Like I've never been in a bear market that did this well, right? It's crazy.
So it sounds like
Um,
from both of you, plebs are just stacking their faces off while the big money is, skittish on the sidelines.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
we're
they're
like,
taking custody.
we're growing users. Yeah, yeah, it's that big money that's just not there right now. But also just wanted to add one sort of just thought to the last conversation, which is the investment funds that raised money in the last bull market haven't deployed it all. So there's still this like reservoir of cash that has to be deployed. And I do actually think that we'd see like no investment right now if those funds weren't around. Like if they had to raise the cash now to invest. That's just like something to recognize that there's still billions of undeployed capital that basically legally has to be deployed.
Yeah.
You know, out of this cohort that Alex is speaking of, um, it's my sort of view, my anecdotal understanding from having conversations with some of these people is that so these are sophisticated, non-risky. They prefer not to be seen as smart money, just smart, wealthy money, sort of like mentality. So they are not going to start buying Bitcoin until the price starts to trending up. They don't want to catch the bottom. They just don't want to get to have to explain to the owners of the family office or whatever that the price went down after their purchase, right? So they rather miss the bottom, buy at say 25K, and like when the price starts to sort of tick up, right? So we're gonna be in this job for a long time because plebes So Bitcoiners, even wealthy Bitcoiners, are tapped out, right? Like everybody bought a few false bottoms, and then you can't, at this size of Bitcoin now, you simply can't. We don't have the economical capacity of lifting the price up anymore, just by ourselves. So we have to wait for new money to come in, and new money only comes in when the bad mouth taste of a market sort of crash washes off, right?
Mm.
And this FTX thing was really like, like this was, these guys are just like, holy shit, like I this is above what I can understand of this space. I'm just gonna sit and watch this for a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
I agree.
I think what a lot of Bitcoiners don't really maybe understand is like the vast majority of people view all of this as the same thing.
Yeah.
I do think like we are making some progress and making it clear like there's a difference between Bitcoin and crypto, but I don't know how effective we can ever really be with that messaging. It's just like if you think of like the average person's life, like it's just so over here that like the nuance of is just totally like not ever likely to sink in. So especially like institutions, like they saw FTX and they're like, all right,
That
I'm out.
was like
Bro.
prime institutional, like product service. I mean,
Yeah.
that to them was the safe people to talk to, not like the crazy Nim on Twitter telling them to put it in a code card.
But
Right?
doesn't
Like,
it show you how little due diligence those like supposedly top tier institutions actually do, whether it's
I
Sequoia or
think they
whomever?
did, and I think it was all lied to. Like,
Well,
FTX had a nice little folder of like, here's the due diligence. It's all beautifully done. The guy's on the cover of Forbes.
is that all it
Like
takes to dupe the
pretty
top,
much.
firms in the world? Is a folder with some lies and some nice spread, I don't know, presentations in them or whatever?
It's all relative, right, to investment size. Like if the guy is putting $100 million, he's not going to spend $10 million on due diligence, right? He might spend 500,000, maybe not even, maybe 100,000, right? So,
It's
and
also a
if you
hot
want,
deal.
yeah, it's a hot deal. It's on
So
the table
they're like,
now.
oh, you want to do all that? Well, I'm gonna let this other guy lead then.
Yeah.
Um,
And
and
also
I
like,
also
So
think
crazy.
well, there's
yeah,
a
go ahead, Al.
cultural aspect to it. Like New York. Look, I don't think there's any secret sort of where I stand on all this overregulation, but like New York, part of the reason all these regulations exist is because like the New York culture has been like they've seen so much financial crime, like they know like they know this, right? Silicon Valley isn't used to financial crime. Like it's not something that like capital allocators are thinking about a lot. And so I also think there's just like a cultural aspect to this that like Silicon Valley now sort of realizes, oh, we need to worry about financial crime. Like there could just be people who are just totally lying to us about like numbers. Like, yeah, there was the Theranos thing, but that was like, that was like a one-off, right? I think this is gonna like really wake a lot of Silicon Valley up to the level of crime that people are willing to commit.
I mean, like if you get a big four accounting firm to do the diligence at this level for you, it's gonna cost like a few $1,000,000. Like this is not like, and it's gonna take a year. Like the deals, the space, everything just moves too fast, right? Um,
FOMO, baby.
so
Nobody's immune.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
it
audits
was
take a
beautiful.
long, like audits are not little things. Like we're audited at River and it is like 10 times more work than you would think. It's unless you've been through it. It's like,
And stupid
so doing that
shit
due
like
diligence and
how,
investment, I mean, that's crazy.
yeah, and also, I mean, I hate to say it, but it's definitely true to some degree. It's like, how harmless did Sam look and seem and all that kind of stuff? You don't think that factored into people thinking like, well, surely
Of course it
this
does.
weird geek vegan is not going to scam me of $1 billion. So whatever, we can
Like
skimp on the due diligence.
institutional could have looked at Binance and seen a much bigger balance sheet and less risk. But
Right.
that's a Chinese dude that like is in some whatever, right? Like while FTX has FTX US. So that means somebody goes to jail, right?
And his
Um,
parents went to our Stanford law professors and he went to
right.
MIT and he worked at
Affiliate
a trading
scamming is
firm where
much better.
yet the social capital was all there.
Do you guys think I mean, we're kind of going deep in the weeds on this now, but like, how deep does this scam go? You know, there's people talking about it used as a slush fund for various political parties and sending money here and washing money there. And obviously, was it his and Caroline's parents are like SEC and can't remember what other department, but you know, the type of people that could help facilitate these sorts of things, or at least minimize the damage if you get caught.
So I have some firsthand knowledge on the political side that I can share.
Sure.
And the rest, I think, is really just kind of more than like sort of
Speculation.
speculation territory for me. I don't know what Rodolfo knows, but I'm decently active in federal politics. I don't think it's any like, you know, sort of, I don't think anyone sort of wonders where I sort of lie on the spectrum, but I was working on sort of supporting some candidates in the 2022 midterm elections. And some money started in some primary races on the Republican side. And some money started showing up for these like boomer Republican candidates. And sort of like I was trying to support like some younger, fresher, like more freedom oriented candidates. And like, and you know, so I won't talk about a specific race, but like one of these candidates, he was doing really well. It looks like he had a shot at like beating this sort of incumbent, like boomer like old Republican guy that just like doesn't really represent like the values that, you know, like freedom oriented Bitcoiners would care about. And this millions of dollars came in for him like at the last minute. And we traced it back to FTX. And I was thinking like, why would this like really clearly liberal like ESG guy be spending money on like this old school Republican to keep him in office in a primary, right? And what it turns out was it was part of this regulatory capture thing happening where this specific incumbent would have been on the agriculture committee, and that oversees the CFTC. And so you know, you basically had this money flooding in to basically sort of, you know, buy off these candidates that would bless FTX with their master plan, if it had all worked, of basically operating in the United States and having the blessing of the regulators. And my hunch, and this starts to get where it's unsubstantiated, is it was all like sort of, it was a criminal enterprise, whether it was started as such or it sort of became one accidentally or on purpose. At some point, like Sam and the others, and again, this is, I do not know this firsthand, this is like a hunch, it sort of became clear, okay, this is like, we need to figure this out. Like, how do we fill this hole? How do we start operating legitimately? And to do that, I think what they realize is they need to acquire legitimate businesses and they need to get the blessings of the regulators so that they could then, you know, operate in the United States, potentially as a public company and raise from the capital markets and fill all these gaps, right? Like, you know, his plan was foiled to get it all working, right? And that's what I think was like, I don't think it's the full story. That's my take on like what he thought like the trajectory would have been.
I'd go full Rodolfo Johns here. It's like, this is like total Air America. It all like fully captured. It all like the spooks were kind of running the show or using him as a useful idiot. They were laundering money for like, you know, Democratic Party, for Ukraine, for like whatever, like really like Air America style. And then they wanted this thing to fail at the end so they could overregulate the industry. It's like, you know, this thing had Gensler glancing to it. Like the scale of this to happen in the way that it did happen, it does not happen without blessings. These guys had bank accounts in the US. They were able to fully operate. They had, didn't they buy like a bank or something in the US too? And also I think they had
on
shares in
Twitter.
another one. You
Unconfirmed.
can't, you literally cannot buy certain types of regulator entities, financial regulator entities in the US without the correct approved, government approved due diligence. Like this stuff is like it was stamped all the way through the hurdles, right? And and he accomplished what they needed to. Now they're going to try to come climbing down
And
on
so
crypto, and they managed
total,
to launder some money.
obviously we're totally speculating here, but do you think
Yes.
it blew up in advance of, so you're saying that they want to invoke the blow up as, justification for whatever regulations? Do you think it happened too soon? Were they trying to juice it for more, or is this all part of the
I think they're
plan?
going to juice it for what they can, right? Like, these people understand that everything has limits, right? So like how much they will, it's like with every type of regulation that is completely stupid, they will do price anchoring style things, balloon trials, right? So they'll say something very absurd, kind of like 9/11, right? So they'll go and say, oh, you can't leave your house without papers. And everybody goes, no, that's just crazy, right? Oh, no, you can leave your house without papers, but you have to show it at the end of the block. People are like, and then only the people who really care about the issue go like, no, that's still bad. And everybody else just, who cares? I can get to the end of the block, right? So like, it really is this sort of anchoring style of regulation that they're bringing on.
So given that, and back to that idea, this idea or discussion about the bear market, because I agree with you, Rodolfo. Like, it seems to me that we're in for a long chop here. Now, of course, anything could happen. Things could rocket tomorrow. But it almost feels like, 2018-ish. And so do you think because of this, one, do you think the fallout is over? And let's remove the X crypto macro situation, but do you think like the within industry fallout is over? And how long do you think it's going to take for all this to digest, basically?
Because of the financialization of Bitcoin, we are no longer in a place where we can just sort of like completely ignore it, right? So because essentially what you have right now is that you have a lot of Bitcoiners that have positions, long positions, they got stuck with from being drunk at the all-time high, right? Um, and
You mean
there's a lot of
leverage
large
positions?
positions.
Yeah.
There's a lot of large positions, right? So those could get triggered, right? Though you could trigger some more liquidations if the price drops, and the price could drop due to macro shit or more catastrophic failures. I'm not very concerned about the Genesis stuff because one is Barry has a ton of money, and he will try to buy that BTC cheap if he can, right? And he's going to have right of first refusal on that. So I'm not very concerned about that. And then everything else that failed so far is going to be stuck in bankruptcy court for like the next 5-10 years. So like if there is any BTC to be liquidated, it's not going to get liquidated from there. I think the biggest issue really is sort of like macro stuff that could then trigger some of the more things to fail. So I don't think we're clear on that for a while. Uh, and it's very opaque and it's very complex, and I don't know, I don't think we can have any sort of like educated sort of guess on this.
I agree, and I think the thing to recognize here is this bear market isn't like the others. This bear market is the first bear market that Bitcoin has had during a macro recession. That's never happened before, right? Like, we've been in an era of easy money since 2008, and Bitcoin came out after that, right? And so that's reversing, and so now we're going to learn, like, how does Bitcoin hold up?
Do you
Um,
do you
yeah,
guys
so,
put
so
any
what I
thought
find
into
interesting though,
the macro
sorry,
situation?
sorry, I missed you there, John.
Like, obviously nobody has a crystal ball here, but in thinking about the macro situation and how it's going to play out, or how they're going to kick the can down the road, or any of that kind of stuff, I mean, does that factor into your guys' thinking? And if so, what are your thoughts on how this macro situation plays out?
um I think I have I think Bitcoiners sort of like greatly discount and dismiss how smart the MMT assholes are. Um, these people have the capacity and inertia on their side to kick this can down the road for another 2, 5, 10, 20 years, right? They could find a way. They will invent some new math. They'll convince enough people. So it is in their interest to accomplish that, right? They don't want to see anything burning down because they lose their jobs.
Mm.
So, now if they accomplish that or not, that's a different story. That's beyond me. But like, I just think it's important to understand that like 8 billion people depend on this working, right? So, and these people earn from that 8 billion people keep on going in that direction. That's a lot of capital. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of minds to change. So, I remember when we changed from the third or fourth failed currency in Brazil to the real, which is the one that still remains now. They literally convinced people overnight to know math that was 1-to-1 to the US dollar, and it kind of worked. So
Who
like
knows? Anything could happen.
exactly.
Yeah. Alex, what do you think?
Honestly, I don't really know. I mean, I generally agree with what Rodolfo was saying. It's like I don't believe a dollar collapse is imminent. I think that's unlikely, not impossible, but unlikely. I think it's possible there's another 10 to 20 years left of like dollar dominance, and it's interesting. Like, if the United States actually does get its act together, which I do believe is unlikely, that would extend it, right? If the United States actually does like move towards a balanced budget and make the political changes necessary, the dollar will last even longer. I don't think it's likely, but yeah. So I don't really know. I don't like. I'm sort of like I said it before. Like macro stuff, I don't really pay a whole lot of attention to because I think it's sort of just like reading tea leaves, and it's not worthwhile. I just like it's like grub brain, right? Like it's like Bitcoin good, Bitcoin logical, like long term over some time period, whatever it is, it's gonna work, and that's how I like plan what I do.
Yeah.
It is my framework that like the US dollar is the best shitcoin, right? It's like that is the shitcoin that everybody in the world wants. So like, that market share is going to be very hard to sort of like, get eroded with all the other government shitcoins, which are worse than like people want more Bitcoin than they want a Italian lira, well, which is euros now. You know what I mean? Like, so like it's like USD in the pecking order is like USD and then Bitcoin, right? Like, so I think that's a very important framework to have, like as at least for the sort of like the mid future kind of like outlook.
Yeah. I mean, I think everyone necessarily has to default to that because nobody can predict how things are going to go and all sorts of potential black swan events. And so you just, follow the age old wisdom, stay humble, stack sats, and things will probably work out well in the end. Rodolfo, on a totally unrelated note, but what's going on in Brazil right now politically? They had that election recently, right? Do you follow that stuff? And if so, what's going
I
on?
only I get what the family tells me, kind of thing. I don't personally follow, but I do get a lot of family feedback in regards to that stuff. So essentially nothing's happening. So you have the new total crime lord, communist crime lord, new president coming in
This is
January,
Lula,
right? Lula,
right? Yeah.
like a legit criminal, like was in prison for quite a while. He is essentially reinstating, because the last guy was unpalatable to a lot of people, but he was more on the, like a
Who,
little bit less
Bolsonaro?
of a criminal, or try not to look like a criminal. While this guy, the new guy,
You're
Lula,
talking you're talking about
yeah,
Bolsonaro?
Bolsonaro.
Yeah.
So Bolsonaro talks a good game, but also good criminal, but not an overt criminal, right? And when we're talking about like politicians in Brazil, we're talking about like real crime, like all of them. Like, and it's a lot of crime and it's a lot of money. Like, So, we don't say these things hyperbolically. They are all criminals. Uh, so anyway, so Bolsonaro was doing a good amount of crime, but doing a lot of good stuff that had to be done and clean up. Um, and but like on the social side, he was a little bit too right for a lot of people there. And in Brazil is essentially divided in two, right? You have sort of like the middle and the south of Brazil. It's like mostly of white European descent, of course mixed and stuff. Brazil, everybody's kind of like some tone of like some background, right? Like we're a lot more mixed up than than other Western countries.
Yeah.
So, but it is a lot less of African descent, right? Um, and then in the north of Brazil, you have like so you have this ethno divide, right? And then you have cultural divide, and the north is a lot more poor, like like a lot more. Like it's like if they own say 20% of the total capital of the country, I'm exaggerating, right? Um, so there you go. You have a perfect political divide. You keep these people poor, they vote for you. These other people don't like me anyways. So Lula caters to the poorer part of the country. Is also a lot more corrupt. So they manage to do whatever. They can claim racism. There's like it gets very complicated very fast, right? And Lula was an overt communist, right? Like not like like legit gun carrying like communist, part of the like what they call a forum of Sao Paulo, which was this big meeting that happened in Cuba in the 70s, I think. It's a group, they all like each other, they all want communism to prevail. um, so Lula's coming back on. He buys all the votes, legit, send checks, big checks, bought
With
all the
what money?
votes, stole all the votes. But the other side also steals, finds their own way of doing their own nasty shit. So it's just nasty on both sides. But Lula has that extra kick of the communist shit, right? So people don't like it, but it's Brazil. In Brazil, people are busy trying to eat, people are busy trying to work, people are busy trying to go around government. So nobody's gonna fight, nobody's gonna go to civil war, none of that stuff. That's just like sort of midstream, not mainstream TV trying to find some drama in Brazil to report about. Of course, there's people on the street, but there's always people on the streets in Brazil. Um, but yeah, I don't believe there is anything to it.
So Lula stays the president and Brazil just has a communist president for the time being.
Yeah, I mean, there's a non-zero chance that Bolsonaro gets the troops to sort of go and kill the guy or do something else, but unlikely in Brazil.
Right. What do you guys make of the recent Twitter revelations and so quote unquote election integrity in the United States?
Not
It's your country, Alex.
shocking.
You run with it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's so I lived in the San Francisco Bay Area for 8.5 years. And it's very clear there, sort of like where people align, right? It is very left wing, like extremely left wing. The norm is like if you're a moderate in San Francisco, you look right wing. Which
So
is why
how
Elon
did
Musk
you get
right
on with
now,
everybody? What was your
I just
social
had a
life like?
friend group. Well, so I grew up. So yeah, I'm pretty right wing. I grew up in a very left wing area. So my whole life I've actually only ever been around majority left wing people. So I'm totally used to it. So like the same social pressures that like make people sort of like closeted, sort of like Republicans, like I just don't care. Like and so I guess I'm just unique in that way. But I get along with everyone. Like it's not, at the end of the day, like you can still get along with people who have different political opinions.
Totally.
There's just like in San Francisco, there's like normal like people who lean left, which I have many friends like that. It's really like this like 5% of people that you don't get elsewhere, which is like crazy, like it's like the crazy blue hair like HR lady, right? That yeah, like wears rainbow t-shirts and stuff, right? And that they really like are who set the tone at these companies. And it's sort of like that intolerant minority sort of like thing, right? And so Twitter is really, and every major tech company is just institutionalizing sort of like the ideology and the norms of the Bay Area. But because they're software companies, the entire world is now subject to this. And like I think the impact of that like can't be overstated.
Yeah.
And it's had a tremendous impact on like shifting our world towards like communist capture of our institutions, and normalizing like nutty ideologies. And so that said, I think like people at Twitter are it's not shocking to anyone who's worked in Silicon Valley, basically. Like, yeah, of course they were working with the Democratic sort of operatives, in the United States government, in the, intelligence agencies to further a political agenda. It's just not shocking at all. And it's what everyone sort of has seen and known in broad daylight. And, they were telling everybody, 2 + 2 = 5. This isn't happening. This isn't true. It's like right as they're doing it right in front of your face, as they deplatform a sitting US president. And now we're seeing how the sausage was actually made, that they were actually coordinating with the FBI, that the FBI had a guy in Twitter who was a former FBI agent. You look at some of the correspondence, right? And they're like, the FBI reaches out, is like, is there anyone at Twitter that would happen to have a top secret clearance? And then, Yoel Roth or one of the other guys working there goes, oh yeah, we do have this other guy, James Baker or whatever it was. And the FBI goes, oh yeah, yeah, that's right. Like they didn't know, like the guy used to work together. And they it's like, oh yeah, that's right. Oh yeah. And it's just, it's
And
like,
didn't
yeah,
they pay?
It's
Didn't
so
they,
overt.
Didn't they? I saw this. Didn't they pay them directly, like 3.6 million or something? The FBI to Twitter.
I saw something about that. I
Yeah.
think, was it for like training or something?
So you have like, and this is true in most countries too. Like when the government engages with you as a private company and you incur like costs, like legal costs or whatever,
Bill them.
there is often a requirement that the government pay some of that back. But from the looks, it looks like that cost was incurred on purpose, so Twitter would get paid on purpose. So they used the correct, like a legal mechanism for them to get paid for things that they shouldn't get paid to begin with, kind of thing.
Yeah. Isn't it such a different vibe out there in cyberspace now? Like we just came out of 2 years where if you question anything regarding COVID, vaccines, man or woman, whatever the fuck else, you were like suspended, deplatformed, demonetized, excommunicated in some way, like immediately without any recourse, and oftentimes. And now you can pretty much say what you want. And it's coming with all the baggage of Elon, and it remains to be seen like what that's going to turn out like. But isn't it strange that like we all forget, well, you forget quickly, I suppose, that the last 2 years have been like just insane
hell.
Dystopian hell on Twitter and social media generally. And here we are now, at least in a place where it feels like you can speak again without having to be concerned about like the words you use and everything you say.
I think we've passed peak woke.
I hope so.
There is nothing like economic catastrophe or the fear of economic catastrophe for the average person who are stockholders, who are like not preoccupied with the nuances of the policy and politics and stuff and social media. Like the fear of losing money sort of normally starts to clean things and sort of air out. Like you look at ESG dying, like funds don't want BlackRock to waste their money in solar panels that are like garbage, right? Like, so the BlackRock ESG fund is like dying out, or already like they're looking at how they're going to handle that, because you know, the smart money was sort of like sleeping through this, you know, like they're fed this thing. Listen, you know, you're saving the world, feel good. Listen, if you invest in our fund, you know, we're gonna stop slavery. We're gonna stop, you know, like abuse against like some form of the rainbow flag people. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like people are inherently good and they want to feel good that they're doing good,
Yeah.
right? And they're busy, you know, in their nice boat somewhere, right? So, you know, oh look, there's a stamp of being a good person on this portfolio, right? And but as soon as the economy starts to go to shit, they start to like, you know, like, okay, let me take a quick look at this portfolio here, right? And I think that's true for even the people who don't have like a massive portfolio, right? They start to reassess like their actions and their allocation of capital, right? Even if it's like which coffee shop they go to. Uh, um, and you know, like the prospect of money being lost is very sort of like it's like a nice little sort of brings you back to reality a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, I generally agree that like I think wokeism is the result of a lot of just like excess. And the minute the rubber has to meet the road, and you know, profit margins start getting thinner, those, you know, 10 diversity executives that you have no longer look as compelling, right? And but I am on the fence of like the longer term here. Like I do think Elon sort of like that sort of like reemphasizes, I think, like the great man theory of history. Like one guy just sort of like illogically threw $40 billion at like, because he like his values were aligned with this thing. Like it did not make sense economically. Like maybe long term it will have, but like he literally just sort of like took one for the team, it looks like. And
Well, it's mostly SoftBank that took one for the team. Elon just convinced enough people to jump in with him.
Sure, yeah. I don't know how much of his own money he actually put in. But yeah, it just took one guy like to do that, right? And I am worried, and I do think more moderate people, like Elon is probably like a 2005 moderate Democrat, right? And it's just gotten so crazy that like some of these moderate guys are now waking up and go, okay, like we actually now have to stand up against this. And but I am concerned that this whole thing, though, I mean, the norms have shifted so far still. Like it hasn't walked back, right? The capture of institutions across the United States. I can't go anywhere without seeing a rainbow flag. I can't walk in an ICU in a hospital without seeing a rainbow flag, right? And the occupation has like progressed very quickly, and you don't just undo that. And the cultures and the norms of the most important institutions in our country, the military, healthcare industry, every federal agency has just shifted seemingly permanently to, you know, a point where it's very concerning. And I'm not convinced that like just rising interest rates will fix it.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I would agree that it's a more ingrained problem, and it's probably going to take some more time to unwind itself. And, you know, punchline, Bitcoin fixes this, in my opinion. But I do think it's a good point that, you know, when you have basically artificially cheap capital, when you have when the consequences of, you know, capital and capital deployment are less tethered to reality, let's say, then you get all these weird perversions of things. And when they have to be brought back to some semblance of reality, even though, of course, like, you know, the Fed setting the cost of capital at whatever it is right now is not reality, but let's say it's a little bit closer, then those excesses are diminished to some degree. And I agree, you know, like another, I think, poignant example was DeSantis in Florida, who won, you know, the phrase "go woke, go broke," I think is catchy and, you know, travels. But just taking on someone like Disney, it's like, okay, you're going to go super woke, or I can't remember. I think they were funding the opposition to one of his bills, right? And he was like, cool, well, your special status, whatever it was, you know, your tax exempt status, that's gone now. You know, how you like them apples. And I think all it takes is a couple of those big examples, like Elon doing what he's doing with Twitter, and that for, you know, a lot of people to be like, well, what do I value more, the flag in the window or $1 billion in our coffers? And I think, you
Yeah.
know, relatively quickly, people are going to be like, I prefer the bank balance than the rainbow flag in the window.
It's the rainbow flag is such a shame, right? Because I mean, you do have a cohort of the population that did struggle for a while, and it's completely co-opted by commies and like
Yeah.
and like kleptocracy through like ESG shit. So it's like, how did this like like what do you like to suck movement sort of became like a total like communist endeavor, right, of the redistribution of wealth. Like that flag doesn't represent people's like sexual preferences. It represents like literal communism. Like like and communism by the definition, right? Like you're not allowed to say stuff, you're not allowed to be free about this stuff, you're not allowed to have your money, like every single aspect that defines communism is represented by that flag, and they keep on expanding on the flag too,
Maybe
which
it's
is
the
kind of
case that,
hilarious.
you know, like those sorts of, you know, communist groups, ideologies always attempt to co-opt the thing that has the
Yeah,
most power. And that symbol of the flag, you know, you're right. Like people did struggle for a long time to get recognition or respect or acceptance or what have you. And as a result, like that symbol, there's a lot of like compassion and perhaps even virtue associated with it at least.
yeah.
And if you can co-opt that as a means of coercing or controlling or manipulating people, then that can be a very powerful tool. And perhaps that's to
They
some
did their
degree what's
civil
happened.
rights in the US, right? I mean, commies infiltrated civil rights movements in order to do the same.
Well, I think it's I think the explanation that I find most compelling is the sort of like idea of um in the United States. So if you look at like how communism spread in other countries in like Russia and China, right? They could appeal to class structure, right? They could go to all the peasants and be like, you will have status in this new system, right? And that is like insanely compelling, right? And it was able to capture power. But once the left in those countries captured power, a strongman stopped the leftward shift, right? Why are China and Russia so less left wing and weirdly like progressive than the United States? You don't see rainbow flags in China. And it's a literal communist country. Why is that? Right. Well, the explanation that I find compelling is that class struggle in the U.S. was never an Achilles heel. Poor people in the US don't feel poor. They feel like they're going to make it someday. So this whole like class stratification as a tool for political division never worked. So instead it's biological. Instead it's based on racial groups and sexual preference. And so like there's and this is really not like some conspiracy, it's the way the incentive structures work. Like, you know, the left really sort of finds the wins and rallying around Black Lives Matter and the rainbow flag, because that's the divide, that's the oppression stratum that leftism in the United States can effectively exploit. They can't do it with class, and that explains what's happening.
That's something I always found very cool about America is that, like, if you ask most people, they don't want more taxes, right? Most countries in the world, if you ask most people, they're perfectly happy with more taxes, or they want people to be more taxed. But in the US, the lower classes know that, they will be making more money at some point if they work hard or be smart or whatever. So they don't want to send back their future. I find that like such an amazing sort of like little heuristic of like just optimism. It's like, don't send back my future. Don't vote for more taxes. Like it's the rich people in the US that want more taxes because they do have other means of like getting around it, right? It's so cool.
Yeah. Alex, I'm just thinking about your China example because I spent a lot of time in China, and I'm just curious now, like why something similar hasn't emerged there. And of course, like appreciating that there's a lot of control over online discourse, and if there's ideas and movements that the government doesn't want to bubble up, then they certainly have means of quieting it to some degree. But you have like a lot of racial homogeneity in China, obviously. And then even what I thought was interesting when I was there was there wasn't, perhaps for the same reason, there wasn't that much class like angst, let's say, or tension, because I feel like the economic story there has been such that everyone feels like, you know, what's the so-called Chinese dream, which is an actual term in China, is available to everyone now because everything's been so good for the last 20 years. And so you would see a guy pull up in his Rolls Royce and sit on the literal sidewalk of a noodle shop that's a hole in the wall and just get out and slurp up his noodles with a, you know, a guy who has $10 in his bank account or no bank account whatsoever. And there really was not, because, you know, even in the US, you wouldn't really see that because those sorts of people wouldn't go to the areas of town where people are eating on the side of the road. And there's definitely a big gulf in the identity of those two people, and that makes it difficult for them to kind of jive. Whereas in China, that doesn't exist at all. Also, because that guy with the Rolls Royce 5 years ago was the dude in the like on the street eating noodles like out of the hole in the wall because the wealth accumulation has been so rapid. So yeah, I'm wondering why we haven't seen the same sort of odd social phenomenon in China and other places as we have in the U.S.
Well, I think I mean, I agree. I think that's maybe generally true, but I do think like the U.S. is, you know, like if you look at New York, right? You go to look at the subway, any given subway car, there's probably a millionaire and a schizophrenic homeless person, right? In the same
New York's
car.
a bit of a special case, but I get your point. Yeah.
But yeah, you know, I think it comes down to sort of the fact that the leftist movements in those countries were able to capture power completely, right? So they had the strongman, and the strongman is what stopped the shift, right? The strongman is what prevented things from getting crazier because they've consolidated power, so they don't want this crazy stuff anymore. They don't want the class strife anymore. Like, the class strife was very real because they had a civil war about it, right? And the strongman consolidated power with Mao or with, you know, Lenin, and that stopped the shift left. The United States has such an effective democracy and such a good federal system with checks on powers that a strongman never is able to actually get that and stop this leftward shift. Again, this is like an interesting theory that I'm not saying, you know, explains everything, but I do think is an interesting aspect. And I'm not saying we should have a strongman. It's like it's almost like we can't have one, so our descent into craziness just keeps going. And it's yeah, I find it an interesting explanation.
Well, I think it's interesting that, you know, speaking of, Alex, you were saying that this, you know, will take more time to unwind itself, if it will. And again, I think Bitcoin will be a massive contributor to that at some point. But it wasn't Elon's motivation behind, you know, buying Twitter, because, you know, his shtick is like, well, I'm interested in SpaceX so that we can be multiplanetary, and, you know, if there's any catastrophe on Earth, we have a second option, and electric cars to save the environment. But I think his, you know, explanation for Twitter was the woke mind virus is basically an existential threat to the world, and Twitter seems to be the place where it's propagating the most, perhaps. And if someone doesn't step in and stop it, then we won't even have to worry about, you know, asteroids or climate change or anything like that, because it's just going to cause us to eat ourselves, basically. Do you guys buy that? And also,
No.
you know, as a before I hand it over to you, do you think, I mean, it seems to me like Elon's got a fuckload of balls. Like, say whatever you want about him and whatever your opinion is, like, he's going up against anyone you can go up against: the Clintons, the deep state, the three-letter agencies, the, like, any other like foreign power, nation, whatever. And it seems like he just has no trepidation whatsoever than to just release anything that comes across his plate and say, and, you know, tweet out anything that he finds suspicious. And like, if I was him, I'd be afraid to leave my house. You know, I know he's got security detail at all times, but man, like, he's really poking the hornet's nest.
You know, I think in a way, like he's essentially permission control the position. Um,
There
you
we
know,
go.
the guy does have the balls. I mean, like, no doubt, right? But again, like you said, like, it doesn't matter how much balls you have. I mean, like, when you cross certain lines, being of a certain size, you're going to be taken down, period, right? Unless you are permitted to. So one is, I think Twitter is one of the greatest sort of like amounts of value, unappreciated value in a company that's ever been around. Um, you know, you have like literally like half the brains of the world sort of like shitting on each other all day on that platform, right? Like you have all the important people, you have all the world's sort of like major conversations. It's absolutely remarkable, right? That this did get to the size. It's like it's the world's public square.
Hmm.
And so assuming, you know, you have value, right? That could be monetized to the extent that it needs to be put to have justified that investment, right? So that is one sort of way of looking at it. Second is Elon is a master in like gathering capital that is not necessarily his, to go do interesting things, right? So Tesla was built on credits, right? Government credits. SpaceX uh, is essentially on government stits, right? Because that's the contracts that do a lot of the stuff that they does. And then like now he has a monopoly on that nobody can get in, so he can do the private satellites too. It's not to diminish his accomplishments, right? Like I mean, the things that he has built are absolutely incredible, but you know, it's very hard to build those things without being also incredible at like, you know, mooching on all that capital and sort of like aggregating it in those ways. And then you have Starlink, right? Also fucking remarkable. But like, you know, you don't get to put rockets in space without being an approved person. You don't get to like cover Earth in satellites for the internet without being an approved person. Like this guy is like playing in a level that like I think even the Clintons are not sort of like capable to, purview to, or sort of
So who
like,
do you think's doing the approving here? Like who's
well, I mean,
approving
it's
Elon's
like just
behavior?
incentives. It's not like necessarily a conspiracy per se, but it's more like incentives and sort of like bigger entities that some of these like usual players, like, you know, the whole, like the stuff that he plays at, the whole military complex has to prove, right? Like he's competing with like Raytheon and like Boeing and like all these companies in some of this stuff, right? So, you know, you have to be approved.
I mean, I half agree, but I do think there's another aspect to this, which is the government doesn't have a choice.
Mhm.
SpaceX is the only launch vehicle,
True.
like that. Well, there's ULA, right? But like U.S. hegemony, especially in space, is basically dependent on SpaceX at this point. So there's this other aspect where like they can't take him down even if they wanted to, because what are they going to do? Like if he ships Starship, like Boeing can't do what SpaceX does, right? Lockheed Martin can't do what SpaceX does.
Yep.
They're run like these old school, you know, pork barrel companies. Like SpaceX is accomplishing things NASA and these companies could never do culturally. And if he's already lowered access to low Earth orbit by an order of magnitude with SpaceX, and if Starship works, he'll move it another order of magnitude, like basically solidifying U.S. dominance of space for like the foreseeable future. And you know, if you're in the like, if you're like this insider in the intelligence military, you know, like U.S. government world, you're kind of like, you know, you're gonna shut that guy down. Like you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So
It's kind of like Howard Hughes in a way, right? I mean, like, you know, like they needed a lot of his technology and the way that he ran things. Um, you know, government is surprisingly good at letting crazy people run loose when they need them to accomplish certain things. You know, like you
Yeah.
look at the Skunk Works at Lockheed Martin, you know, Operation Paperclip with NASA.
Mm.
Uh, eh, that's what I'm saying. It's like, you know, like they're okay with like him running the Bird app, right? Like they probably like one of the big funds that funded them is maybe funded by them too. You know, like they just, it's still controlled.
I guess everyone has a hierarchy of what's most important or most valuable, right? And it's like, well, Elon might create some problem for the DNC or for the Biden administration or for whomever, but we still get his rockets and his satellites and all that stuff. So maybe that's a trade-off we're willing to make. I mean, who we'll probably never know. Speaking of never know, did you guys see the recent hoopla around the JFK assassination? That's come
Yeah, I
to
saw
the
stuff
fore
floating
again.
around. I don't know what actually triggered that. What was it, like a Tucker interview with somebody, or?
I that's the place that I saw it. So I don't know why, if there was a new revelation or someone that was so-called directly involved came forward, and that's why he covered it. But yeah, I don't know. The pendulum just seems to be really swinging. Like we were in 2 years of like the government is truth, the government is science. Do everything they say, don't question it, or you're completely removed from society. To like dramatically swinging to everything's on the table now. They've been lying to us about everything, and maybe even let's investigate some of it.
Like you can look at it from like two angles, right? Like one is like you can go, hey, maybe this is more controlled opposition. Here's some noise,
Right,
right?
right.
Who cares of our generation if Kennedy was assassinated by the government or not, right? Like probably not a lot of people. Um, so like here's more noise, right? The other way is just you can just think about just time, right? You have enough time. There's not enough people alive who can sort of like truly shed light on it or go to jail or whatever. So it's kind of like, okay, it's time to open this one, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the point about noise is a very strong one, because even all these things can pop up, and even if they're your issues, right, they align with your ideology or what you think was true or what you think happened. If it's taking your attention away from the thing that's most important to you and that you think is actually the thing that's going to move the needle the most, then it's effective in a certain way, to as far as people that might want you to avoid doing certain things is concerned. And
don't they
my
have a, yeah, sorry.
my perspective on that is just like, I can identify all these problems, and I already distrusted all the government institutions for a very long time. And so I just de facto assume they're all lying and they're all incompetent. And I'm sure there are some good ones in there, right? But by and large, not trustworthy and incompetent and corrupt. But what's one to do in the face of something, so monolithic and so powerful? And to me, for several years now, it's been Bitcoin. Do Bitcoin as much as you can and focus on that, because that's the thing that has is the greatest force multiplier for improving, if not fully rectifying, many of those things. And so anything that distracts your attention from that, like going down a rabbit hole of some, declassified documents and trying to hold those people accountable, is ultimately unproductive, because you're taking your time away from the thing that's the thing that's most capable of rectifying the most things.
Yeah, no, I mean building new things is really where the time should be spent. Like there is enough sort of like low yield people in society who will pursue those endeavors and will try to sort of like find some closure, and it's like low productivity sort of like part of society. Let them do those things. Like people who actually have like good things to produce to society should just like ignore all the noise and just sort of like go ship.
Yeah, go full man in the mountains.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is that kind of, that's the outrage loop. Not that it's one side or the other. It's like, here, look at this and be angry about this, and here, look at this, be angry about that. And again, it doesn't have to be a conspiracy, because the incentives are such that the people serving you that, if they can get more time from you, get more of your attention, then in the current model of things. And as a side note, I think this is why, the value enabled web, Bitcoin coming to cyberspace, is so interesting, because I think it's going to rectify a lot of those incentives, slowly. Obviously, it's basically just the beginning now, but we'll start, we won't be monetizing attention and outrage the same way. And hopefully we'll be skewing things more toward, value add and productivity, and dare I say truth at some point, which would be wonderful.
Gigi wrote a great blog post about
He
value for
did, yeah.
value and attention economy and all that stuff. I highly recommend people going and reading it. Um, I started the pod thing and I'm like, hey, like this value for value sounds like completely absurd, right? Because, realistically speaking, like it's very hard to like earn any income from people just donating, right? Because they like it. I'm sure there's going to be one or two guys who are very good at engaging and they'll find some income like uh, Adam Curry, right? but like for the majority of people who are starting out, like, I mean, they're not going to find enough income to sustain their families, right? Like doing this stuff. But hey, this stuff grows enough, and there is like very low friction networks for people to earn, like by producing some value on top of, say, ethical advertising or something like that.
Mhm.
I think we're in a much more like better place morally than we would be if it was just, just nice ads.
Yeah.
Um,
I think two things will surprise us a lot. One is the added value, the added functionality that apps and platforms and services will have with this value transfer layer added into them. Like, I think it opens up a world of possibilities that will dramatically improve the experience. And I also think when that mind shift happens, like when that's more normalized and when there's less friction to it, like when we can more easily express value, let's say, I think we'll surprise ourselves how our idea of how commerce, let's say on the internet or in digital landscapes or even in meat space, actually works. Like, I think we'll look back and see, not for everything, of course, because different things are priced differently for different reasons, but we'll see certain things as being like a price cap. And we all would admit, like, well, a price cap in communism or something is a bad thing, right? It doesn't allow the proper supply demand dynamics to take place. And I think ultimately we'll see something like that, where we'll be surprised to the upside, or how many people willingly reimburse people for the work that they've produced that person happens to value. And just two quick anecdotes on that. One, there's this guy, I forget his name right now, I apologize to him, but he's a musician, I think out of the UK, and he released his most recent album in a value for value model. And his thinking was basically, he's a small artist and not doesn't have a massive audience. And his Spotify, I think he gets like 0.0002 of a cent per play or something like that. And his calculation, the punchline was, he's making a lot more, using value for value than he would have been on Spotify. So, again, early days, small artist, but that's interesting. And then I spoke to the chief Bitcoin officer, which I think is probably going to be a more common role as we move into the future, as companies, learn that, recognize that they have to integrate Bitcoin beyond just accepting Bitcoin. And it's the Perth Heat in Australia. It's a baseball team in the professional league there, and they've integrated value for value just this past November. And in its initial incarnation, it's something called Sats for Stats. So you can watch the live game, and then there's a QR code pops up when the guy's up to bat. You can send them Sats directly. And of course, they have Bitcoin integrations throughout the rest of their organization. But they calculated for fielded players, just after 1 month, their income went up by 2%. And that's pretty material after 1 month of a totally new thing that most people have no idea about. Like, how many people have a Lightning wallet and are able to send Lightning payments to, anywhere? So you give that some years to play out and to get smoother. And I think it could end up being extremely material. And the underlying philosophy that this idea of setting value free, which Gigi articulates so well. He dropped another article 2 or 3 days ago called about the value enabled web. And I think it's required reading for everyone, because it really helps to paint the picture about where this thing may go, and the capabilities that, Bitcoin, Lightning, and other, layers are going to facilitate with this stuff. It's super, super exciting.
We did I think 2.5 hours conversation on Bitcoin.review. I think it's like episode 11, with Adam Curry and Gigi, and I forget the Oscar, and
Yeah.
Matt. Oscar is the guy
Fountain.
from Fountain. And I entered that conversation very skeptical. I understand the ad dynamics, and it's outsized, right? Because it is asymmetric to the audience.
Mm-hmm.
So, but after talking to them for quite a bit, I think my realization of this is that what we're gonna see is a lot more patronage. Essentially,
Yeah.
you're gonna see, if you want that show you like, that thing you like to exist, right? you're going to have to support it financially, right? Because that person has an opportunity cost that got repriced in Bitcoin, right? So that person could be going to do something else to buy Bitcoin for their future, right?
Mhm.
So if you don't fulfill that Bitcoin purchasing opportunity cost for him, he will go do something else, even though he loves doing that passion project, right? Um, so I think you're gonna find a lot more old school patronage. Back in sound money days, if you had a lot of money, or you'd patron somebody who was great to do something just because you loved it,
Mhm.
right? And hopefully that becomes something that you pass on to your children, right? Either by ownership of the thing, or just by the fact that, listen, I patron Da Vinci, right? Like there's a pride in that. There's a lot of interesting human dynamics in that. And I think that, this lightning sats thing really sort of starts to play in that. It's like, instead of just like you got sats, um, it's not an empty gesture, right? You're parting with something. Anyways,
And
it's
there's something to it. I mean, on the one hand, you have, everyone wants to hodl as much as possible, right? So there's an extreme, there's, you would think there's an extreme aversion to spending Bitcoin. And I guess to an extent there is. It determines, everyone probably has an amount they're willing to play around with and an amount they're not going to touch. But one, giving sats is somehow different than giving fiat. I don't know if I'm just way too deep in the like weeds with Bitcoin philosophically, but it's like it's a far more virtuous act in a way, or there's better principles wrapped up in it, and perhaps not surprisingly, because you're not giving someone a debt, you're not giving someone something that can easily be stolen from them, if not physically, but in terms of its purchasing power or value. And then of course receiving sats is even better, right? Because even if it's like 10 sats, like you ask anyone who uses podcasting 2.0 or has value for value in some way, it's like they see a little message come in for 100 sats and it puts a smile on their face, and it's nothing, it's absolutely nothing, but it has that effect. So I think the change in the nature of the currency and how frictionless it's going to be is going to change the behavior. And then to your point, Rodolfo, like I do think that I don't know if Bitcoiners is the right word to use, but when people establish greater and greater financial security, and it's not equivalent to say like $1 million in fiat and $1 million in Bitcoin, because as we know, the security you feel around the latter is far more profound for most people than the former, or for Bitcoiners, let's say. I think there's a lot more capacity for charity, and charity is the wrong word because you're getting something in return, but maybe generosity is the right word. Like I think
I
that
mean,
there's going to be a
economic
lot.
capacity is a very important thing. Like,
Yeah.
you can't do anything without having economical potential, right?
Hmm.
Economical capacity. Like, because you can't do everything, right? So you need to be able to fund things, if that's funding your coffee, because you really want it. So but because we have fiat and we don't have a pricing mechanism for the money, right? Because the money just sort of like streams from that, right? So like
Hmm.
we don't have a way of pricing our future, right? And Bitcoin is the opposite. So that's sad that, like, I'm super happy when somebody sends me like literally like 10 sets just saying hey, right? Like it, it's a weird thing because those sets, like you said, economically, right, at this moment mean absolutely nothing, right? But
Yeah.
that person parted away with something that has true value for them,
Mm.
right? It is priceable, unlike fiat, that has an economic upside to in the future for real, not like debasing. So like it's very special, right? And again, it's not just a like. And then there's all the other economic things around it too, right? So you are able to know for certain if people are actually listening to that, not just pressing play like a bot or something, because it costed them sats to do so. There's like a lot more nuance and a lot more interesting things are able to happen in this sort of like sat streaming or sat exchanging dynamics.
Yeah. And just on your point about like the patrons, and I think most people might be familiar with like patrons in the Renaissance or something like that. But that is my sense about where things are heading. Like when people have the financial security, they have the capacity to be more generous. And then it's just a matter of like, is the cause meaningful enough for them to do so? And again, we're so early, but initial impressions are that I guess the capacity combined with the capability, like how frictionless it is to do so, I find Bitcoiners to be extremely generous. Like you find someone who says on Twitter, like, "Oh, I had this bad thing happen to me," and people like throw up an invoice, you know, and we'll send you a bunch of sats. Or people that are doing really interesting charitable work in El Salvador right now, building schools or building, you know, medical clinics and that kind of stuff. And again, I'm highly biased, but I do think that the combination of those two things and possibly more, the capacity and the capability, like the technology being there to do it easily, those two things taken together, I think we're going to find that there's a lot more generosity, a lot more patronage, a lot more willingness to fund things that you want to see in the world, things that you think are meaningful, as we move into a Bitcoin standard and people having, you know, greater financial security and less people in an artificial, let's say, sense of deprivation, which the fiat system produces by and large. You know, so people are incentivized to hold as much as possible to their chest, because consciously or not, they know that it's slowly being drained from them. So you're far less incentivized to give and to patronize and to do those things. And I think we're going to see basically the reverse of that as we move into a Bitcoin standard. And I think value for value is conducive to that phenomenon or that change taking place, let's say.
You know, like through all the cycles of Bitcoin since the very early days, you know, you had like guys like Ver, you know, he funded like a lot of the early companies in the space, right? Because he managed to get a huge pile of Bitcoin early, right? There was a lot of people like that who just funded everything, even though it was like, you know,
But that's an
almost certain
investment,
those
right?
guys were not going to make it, right, as a company. But it was necessary step in order to have interest in the market to do things, right? I mean, you look at the kids from Nostr. Up until 2 days ago, I had no idea they were completely unfunded, right? Like, so like, you know, this came about, like Jack sent them 14 Bitcoin, like, here, like, fund
Exactly.
yourselves, right?
Exactly.
And like, I think people, when people are capitalized, of course, they're more willing to share, right? Because they're not like making their family eat less or whatever. It becomes more discretionary. But the other thing too is, I think because a lot of these people in the space are seeking truth, are seeking honesty, right? They're more willing to believe that the person, this NIM on the other side, is an honest person. So they're more willing to just give, right? I think like most people are fairly good at charity. It's just that like charities are so sort of captured by fiat things and by regulation and by stuff that like people just assume that when you donate, you know, that the bureaucratic class of that entity is just going to take 80% of the donations,
Right.
you know, to pay for their nice shit. So I think because now it's like direct donation, and you can often see when it comes to coders that, you know, the stuff is getting done on GitHub, right? People are more willing to give. Like, people, I think, just want to make sure that what they're giving is being actually used for a good cause, right? Um,
Yeah, you want to see
so
the
so that's why I
impact.
think like a lot of the transparency.
Totally. What do you guys think of the Nostr phenomenon? It seems like it's taken Twitter by storm the last couple of days. I know it's been around for a while, but it's really, after Jack came on board with the donation and, you know, put his address in his profile and everyone's piling in. It's kind of like, you know, prior Mastodon movements and stuff like that, but it seems like it has a little bit more stickiness to it. What do you guys think?
I'm excited to see people try out new things. You know, I think we're gonna make one for River. I think, you know, I'm always skeptical that a decentralized social media can provide the same UX of a centralized service, and will really be able to capture like the network effects. But I really would love to see it happen, and I'm really glad people are trying.
So I've had keys on this thing for a long time, and I was not very active, but then I became active on it. Uh, what's fascinating about Nostr is that this is a extremely simple protocol to do messaging, right? So this is the kind of stuff that you replace the internet with, right, on the same pipes. And it's good for email. It's good for, like, you can replace email. You can replace your calendar system. You can replace social media and Twitter. it's just like one very narrow application of this protocol. Um,
Do you
so
mean
it,
replace the internet from like a server model to a just more distributed
it's
architecture?
server model. So essentially, what Nostr is just a federated relay system,
Right.
right? So essentially, anybody can run a server that just relays Nostr packages, messages,
Mhm.
right? So those messages are very simple, and they're all based on public private key cryptography, right? And they use Bitcoin primitives, which makes it great. So that's why Bitcoiners are so excited about it.
Mhm.
So you know, the internet is essentially a bunch of packages, right? As the famous congressman said, is a series of tubes. Um, so like you have essentially like all the servers out there in Nostr, right? Like relaying and storing this messages concurrently. So like you can have many in parallel storing the same. So they could be storing my message I just sent to you. Maybe Alex server doesn't like me and doesn't want to store mine. It doesn't matter, right? It still relays. It's kind of how the internet used to work way back in the day.
Mhm.
So what right now we're doing, and it's like a great use case, is this Twitter sort of replacement, and it's absolutely fantastic and very active. The UX is actually really good. Still choppy, of course, and all that stuff. Mastodon failed because it's shit software run by essentially like fully woke, like truly woke people, right? So my instance, bitcoinhackers.org, got blocked by every single Mastodon server that there is because we were unmoderated, right? With Nostr is very different. You can still participate with each other even if your servers don't like each other. You just choose who you personally don't want to interact with. In a certain extent, it's not built out yet, but um, this thing feels like Bitcoin in the beginning. It has the right intention, it has the right honesty, it has the right set of incentives, it has the right simplicity, it has enough capitalized people interested in it, and it can be used for many different things. Um, so if it replaces Twitter, that's a sort of separate question. It's already fun enough that you're going to see Bitcoin Twitter get a lot more quiet. Um, but it will definitely replace many things, and it will definitely replace many boring things that you would not expect, like calendar servers, kind of thing. Like it has a lot of potential to fix a lot of deep, profitable things. So that's why it has a high chance of sort of like really taking the world by storm. I think that's why there's so many people that are in our circles. We're so excited about it. Get an account, like get a key pair, go play with it, download this Demos app if you're on iOS, because then it's like boomer proof. You turn it on, it works.
I've been
Um,
on Astral Ninja so far, and
there you go.
that one, the UX is okay. It's not super clean. I think I might try the one that you just mentioned, because that's you said iOS, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the intent of this specific one is to sort of emulate Twitter-like dynamics, right? Uh,
Yeah.
that's the application they're sort of like building on top with this package system.
Right. Yeah, interesting. It'll be interesting to see if it sticks. You know, the counter force is, and I understand that there's a lot more potential than just a Twitter replacement, but you know, it looks like we're heading into an era where Twitter is less censored, you know, and because I think, yeah, obviously a large part of the selling point for a lot of this stuff is free speech, right? Less censorship. You can say what you want. You can't be muzzled. You can't be deplatformed, all that stuff. Now, I think it's probably wise to consider this a reprieve from the censorship and not like a full-on pendulum swing, because God knows what could happen, you know, to Elon or however the story unfolds. But I think it's great. I mean, do you not think that ultimately we wind up in a and actually I want to take this full circle and maybe close it out in the last couple of issues, but one of the issues over the last year that I think is apparent is that a lot of these problems come from trying to fit Bitcoin into the legacy financial world and legacy financial thinking and fiat thinking. And if you do that, whether you're the operator, the entrepreneur, the customer, you're going to get wrecked because they're largely incompatible systems. Some aspects are more compatible than others, but like they're predicated on very different principles. And so people that are trying to have their cake and eat it too by having both, you're probably just going to get wrecked at some point. And so I think the internet generally is probably going to move to an architecture where, you know, it's a lot harder to get wrecked. That's part of the reason why I wanted to have Matt on the show today, because he's working on sovereign computing, right? And, you know, running your own server and hosting a lot of your own stuff. And that's an element of that, hosting your own podcast, hosting your own websites, and being more expensive to tyranny, as they say, right? Harder to shut down and harder to censor. And I think that's the way things are going. And I think this past year in Bitcoin has been a bit of a lesson in that. Like there's some things that you're just not going to be able to do with Bitcoin, and you're just going to have to live with that. Like stacking sats and just doing nothing else with your money is probably the way to wind up with the most Bitcoin in 10 years from now. But I've heard both of you guys kind of comment on that to some degree. And the way in which I'm thinking now is, you know, the issue about custodians, right? And, you know, companies in the space, various companies using different custodians versus what you guys do, Alex, which is basically build your own custodian model and you know, promote the benefits of taking self-custody and all that kind of stuff. But where do you think, well, what are your opinions on that? And Alex, one you've been bringing up was in relation to PrimeTrust, which like most consumer facing platforms in the space use. Like what do you guys think is the crucial point here and how things are going to develop from here?
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot here, right? You know, at River, we control our own custody. We encourage people who buy Bitcoin to take that Bitcoin into their own self-custody. You know, a lot of companies, you know, for those listening who don't really sort of know how this all works, going through the hassle of getting all the licenses required to hold client funds yourself and to actually serve as a financial institution, it's a lot of work, right? So instead, they said, like a lot of companies go, we'll just focus on building the app. We'll let this other company act as the financial institution. And actually, they're going to be the one where the customer has the account and they actually move the money. We just like build an app on top of that, right? Now, that's how neobanking works, right? That's how fintech apps, that's how like Chime and like these, you know, these like techie bank apps work. They're not actual banks. They have a bank behind the scenes that they're basically this like wrapper on top of, and they have a unique go-to-market strategy, and they're good at product and, you know, blah, 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 blah. The problem with Bitcoin and doing this in crypto is that you have a lot of sketchy companies in this industry. And if you're and PrimeTrust in particular, and again, like I don't have any insider knowledge here. This is all just sort of like theoretical failure modes that I'm discussing. But you know, when you have an account on an app built on PrimeTrust, well, you actually have an account at PrimeTrust, right? What if it turns out, and PrimeTrust is sort of like letting that app act on your behalf, right? And there are some checks, right? I think in some cases, if you're withdrawing Bitcoin, PrimeTrust sends you an email and make sure that you initiated that. But there's book transfers happening, not on chain, right? Between the company and your account and all this sorts of stuff. What happens if it turns out one of PrimeTrust's enterprise customers was doing funny business with customers' assets and PrimeTrust didn't have the controls in place to prevent that from happening? Do those users of that app doing the funny business have a claim against PrimeTrust? And the failure mode there would cascade to every company built on PrimeTrust, right? Because the assets aren't there. And there's this, you know, they're saying they're segregated. I don't think I've never seen evidence to suggest there's any segregation happening. I'm not saying it's not. I've seen no evidence to on chain to suggest that it is segregated. So what happens in that world, right? Well, everyone using the shared custodian, all of a sudden you have one Bitcoin in the custodian and two people claiming that they have a Bitcoin, you know, right? Like we all know how that, what happens there. So again, like I'm not claiming there's fraudulent activity happening. I'm not claiming that this is the case. I don't think a lot of people are aware of like the types of failure modes that might be possible.
Yeah.
I know the new CEO of PrimeTrust, and I was asking him, right, like, what are you inheriting there? Because this was planned months ago, like before the whole shit show happened, right? The succession of CEOs. You know, he of course can't tell me like details and stuff. He said shop looks good. I can't trust because I can't verify. But I think that you know what I said to him is like, you know, like you guys need to do a better job at like, you know, conveying risk to the market so that people understand the risk, the full risk, right? Which the clients who do engage with them do get. And also like, you know, making sure that there is enough disclosure allowed by the clients of PrimeTrust to sort of like put out to the public of like how the risk works and all that stuff. You know, there is decent people there, but again, you know, like I totally understand where Alex is coming from. Like it's like it's opaque, right?
Has there been an explanation why why not just verify funds in a traditional sort of
It's
way?
pointless because you can have a proof of Bitcoin, right? Like you
Right,
can do
right.
like a chain signature, but you don't know the liabilities. And the liabilities you trust in the auditors, right? Enron was great at getting everybody on board. So
But
like,
Also, all the
what
people at
liabilities?
PrimeTrust could be good. Like, I'm not saying PrimeTrust
Yes,
is
all the
committing criminal
disclaimers.
activity,
This is not like
yeah,
anything bad against PrimeTrust or it's the people involved, but it's an interesting issue that should be discussed,
but
you know, so.
like, what's the failure mode if one of their enterprise customers was criminal, right? Like, and what's the
well, they
claim that
have
what's
like,
the claim that the users of that enterprise have against PrimeTrust?
no, it could be
Right.
worse than that, right? I mean, they could have a contract with somebody else, and then they have this huge gaping liability they wouldn't know about until they know about, and the market is often tanking when those things happen. So like, listen, I think like we can't escape those things. Like there's no way in which Bitcoin on ramping will exist without like economically viably, right? The same way you can't have the loans with interest in a reasonable way without having more risk on counterparty. So like in order to find the economies that you need to have risk, right? That's risk versus price. Those things kind of go hand in hand. So I think finding more um, clarity, finding more transparency is great. I think companies need to show more to the customers where their risk is. The, when you buy publicly traded companies, they have to disclose risk, right? When you're a consumer, nobody has the requirement to disclose your risk. So I think it's on to Bitcoin companies to start disclosing risk and say, hey, listen, guys, we are a Bitcoin broker. We use this prime broker, and their risk is to us believed to be this much and here, right? And like, please get your funds off of my platform as soon as you buy them, right? So like everybody accepts the risk, everybody understands that that's how you find a Bitcoin for a low fee, and it's a much better place to be on than just sort of like, please trust me.
Well, sure. Okay, two questions on that. One is for a custodian, a la PrimeTrust or whomever else, you know, you said one of the reasons why they can't easily be audited is because you know you don't know their liabilities. But what liabilities would a company like that have? Like a pure
Oh, it could be shareholder loans, it could be like it could be like how like it could be a lawsuit that they were underinsured for, right? Like it's essentially like infinite. right? So what you normally do is you have a big accounting firm review your books, review every single liability. But then how many hops do you go on those liabilities, right? Because maybe a asset on the balance sheet looks good enough for an auditor, but then you go look deeper into that asset that looked like it was AAA mortgages or whatever, right? But is actually full of toxic shit because the other second tertiary party on the liability was lying to you or a criminal, right?
So what do you think's the alternative? How should those trust determinations be made in absence
I,
of
I think
that
I think
degree of clarity?
the market is very good about that, right? So Unchained Capital is no liability against your BTC collateral, right? Zero. They don't own your BTC. They can't rehypothecate nothing. It's sitting there on multi-sig. That means that they all they can do is offer you 14% interest. Super expensive interest,
Mm-hmm.
ultra expensive interest, right? So just through this pricing mechanism, you can normally find out. If somebody is offering you yield on Bitcoin denominated in Bitcoin, it means you are the yield to somebody else, right? So like I think the market just needs to learn all the lessons that traditional finance learned, right? Because they used to have a lot of this criminal sort of like products back in the day. It's just, a lot of this stuff got regulated. I just hope that people getting fully racked sort of like helps with us not having regulation around this stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as everyone recognizes, there's so much shady business in the space that throwing a bunch of Bitcoin in a black box and saying, "Hey, trust us," is, you know, shouldn't inspire much confidence in that many people. Even and now, I agree. Like over time, the market should, separate the wheat from the chaff. But it's still, given the capabilities of this asset. And Alex, I got a question for you, but I want you to respond. What were you going to say first? But it doesn't inspire that much comfort. Let's say.
Well, I was going to say one just like simple, and again, this doesn't solve everything, but like if like as far as I can tell, there's no on-chain segregation happening at PrimeTrust. If they just did that and they could show their each enterprise, even if it's not by user, just like by enterprise, right? Your coins are here on chain, right? That would help a lot.
Yeah.
Because then those companies can at least say, well, we can see to their users, like we can see your coins on chain. It's not just like an entry in their ledger.
Yeah,
right?
no, or offer a price, right? Like this is what I've been talking to a few companies that were doing lending and stuff before through the years because I wanted mortgages to happen and stuff. So like, just go to the customer and say, hey, listen, here's an option where there's no risk. It costs 14%. Here's an option with some risk. It costs 10%. Here's a fully risky option. It costs 5%, right? So like, and this is true for enterprise to enterprise too, right? So like PrimeTrust could go to say River and say, hey, listen, come use us as your source of Bitcoin, right? If you want us to just IOU, it costs this much, and if you want us to segregate, it costs this much more. And then you can make a business economic decision on what makes sense to you, right? Like, I don't know, like that, just the option already transpires a lot more trust to me, even if you end up for economic reasons not taking the lowest risk option. It's just the fact that it's there. I think it's a huge win.
This may be a stupid question, but would the enterprises like that use a PrimeTrust, what degree of transparency would they have on? I mean, they would know how many, what like the volume they're doing, and they'd be able to parse out what they should have, I guess, being custodied
You
by.
depend on their contract. I mean, it depends on their size. The bigger fish you are dealing with a financial institution, the more clarity, the more access to stuff you get, right? Because you get to start dictating terms on how you do your due diligence. So like when Saylor probably went to Coinbase and said, hey, I want to park a third of my Bitcoin here, right? They bend over, right? Like
Right.
you can look at whatever you want. You can follow me every day. Now, if if a smaller entity goes there and say, "Hey, I want to park," a hundredth of what he did, they're gonna go like, "Okay, this is our standard contract."
That seem right to you, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways to use PrimeTrust. Like the mode I'm talking about is when you're using them as the financial institution, like, and you're like basically serving as an agent of their like trust charter, where like every user in your app also has an account at PrimeTrust, and PrimeTrust is KYCing, PrimeTrust is processing the payments, PrimeTrust is holding the assets, and PrimeTrust has a ledger with every user of your app on there, right?
Mhm,
So that's how it works. And you know, like, so a company can look at their ledger, like, you know, in PrimeTrust and see all my users have this much Bitcoin, right? Some of it might be in flight, right, from like a trade or something. But like they should, if it's actually segregated, they should be able to see a wallet where the coins are sitting, right?
mhm.
It's
Let me,
tricky, right? Because it is inefficient, and I'm not defending that behavior. Like I personally wish it was one-to-one on a UTXO, and people would have a UTXO visibility, right? So actual coin visibility. But realistically speaking, when the majority of the clients are like buying, $100 worth of Bitcoin per trade, right? Like it
Well, I'm not
becomes,
talking about segregated per user. I'm talking about
yeah.
segregated per like
Oh no,
entity.
no, I agree with you.
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
just saying, like, how they manage their shit is like, they're
Yeah.
going to try to find the most efficient, cheapest way of possibly doing it, right? Even if they're not being nefarious. uh
yeah, I mean, and I think another thing you said was how companies communicate in this space. I mean, in every industry, it matters how people communicate. And I've seen some plebs chirp up asking why there's been no explanation, if there hasn't been, because I haven't been following it that closely, about the former CEO being fired. And I know you said, Rodolfo, that that was planned before all the
yeah,
FTX debacle, but
it
still,
was
when
not
you're
fired. It's
custodying that much
poor
funds,
communication.
yeah, exactly. Alex, question for you on this, because it's obviously super relevant to you. Like, you've built your own, and because you believe that that's the best way to do it, that's the most secure and transparent way to do it. But you're not non-custodial, for because a lot of users are going to not want to take custody of their funds either at all or initially. And I keep coming back to this again, that tension between like the legacy world and Bitcoin world, where it just seems like if people don't treat this asset or avail of the benefits of this asset by taking self-custody ultimately, then we recreate a version of the former world in a way. And we also just kind of, people that keep getting wrecked until they learn the lesson that you have to hold your own keys. And it's almost like the better the custody solutions get, and then ETFs pop off and all this kind of stuff, that disincentivizes people to go down the self-custody, rabbit hole. And then, at some point people get wrecked. Now, sure, there'll be some institutions, I'd like to think, River, who does such a good job that you never compromise. You don't have, funds are always safe. But who's to say that the custodian of the ETF or whatever enterprise, like, these are all going to be vulnerable at some point, and there will always be these instances where people get wrecked in advance of taking custody themselves. But obviously the point is, like, how much, I don't know, volume, liquidity do you leave on the table if you don't offer a service like that? And the answer right now is probably a shitload. And so how do you reconcile knowing like the benefits of this asset represents and wanting people to approach it that way, but knowing that there's also a huge demand for offering somewhat of an alternative approach?
I mean, so I think I maybe view it a little bit differently. I don't view it as like this client is a self-custody client and this client is a like they keep it with us client. It's a spectrum that people like sort of move over time, right? So I view our custody as like,
do they though? Is that your experience, that they do move over time?
Yeah. We like during the FTX thing, we had like large depositors
Sure.
who were like finally like finally like I'm gonna self custody, right? And like when they first started using River, they were totally new to Bitcoin, right?
Right.
It was like super like, it would have been like buying that amount of Bitcoin and also self custodying that same day would have just been like it's just like too much, right? And so like we don't make any money on custody. If everyone withdrew from River tomorrow, I'd be kind of relieved.
Right.
So like it's actually in our economic interest, because we don't monetize custody, to encourage people to take delivery of their Bitcoin. That said, I I don't want to live in a world where you can't trust any institution, like ever, right? Like that's actually not like an effective civilization, right? I do believe like institutional trust is like a core part of having, you know, a healthy society. I want people to be able to trust River, but not have to. And I think like because you don't have to, right? Because there's Bitcoin gives you that option, it will lead to a world of higher trust institutions. That's maybe that's not like maybe that's a little sort of some hopium there.
No, it's not.
But I do think that's what's going to happen. And I don't think everyone is like, and the reality is institutions are also like not really set up to like it. No one wants to have to recreate the wheel every time, right? Some they want to trust institutions. That's always going to be a factor. And I think that's just reality. I think that's just humanity.
Can I give you just one example that's interesting on this dynamic? So, with Cold Card, you can like go full tin foil on it, right? You guys are users of that, So like, you can check the source code, you can build the source code, you can check the signatures, you can use dice, you can do this, you can do that. Like you can do it in such a way, there's absolutely no way CoinKite can rug you, right? Realistically speaking. I mean, like aside from just, having a probe in your brain or something, right? Like even then, right? Like, do most users do that? No. Knowing that there is people who do go through that extent, one proof that the company is honest about offering that option, right? And I think that cycle of honesty with provability creates a different dynamic between like you and your users. There is a different kind of trust and a different kind of verify, right? People will use people they know as heuristics to trust a company or not trust that company. You create a bit of a web of trust in one sense, which humans are great at, right? But because we have to keep that trust option in there working at all times, they also know that there's no window for us because there's people who are verifying, right, for us to sort of to try to rug you, right? And I think that dynamic is true around everything in Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is like that. Do most people run a node and check their UTXOs? No. Do most people check that there is no inflation bug on Bitcoin? No, right? But there's enough people who are, right? And the option is there for anyone to do so, that creates this perfect dynamic, really, right? That creates the efficiency that most people don't go through the trouble because it is inefficient. It's very inefficient to go through the trouble, but it does sort of like create this helm of some trust or levels of trust that you're willing to go based on your efficiency needs. I think that dynamic is absolutely amazing, and that's sort of like what Bitcoin really sort of changes for financial, for software, for everything.
Yeah. No, I agree with both of those points, that having the option where you don't need to trust, where you can do everything in a, let's say, self-sovereign sort of way, that does create an interesting and new dynamic in terms of trust. And I think it allows for the trust that emerges in a market dynamic to be more reliable than perhaps the one where we have right now. I guess that the tension is always just going to be, especially in relation to Bitcoin, what is the dynamic around regulation and how governments treat it, and what are the attack vectors going to be that incentivize or inspire people to change how they think about this? So even though a trust model might work for a given circumstance, when the circumstances obviously the trust model might change as well. And so Alex, the customers you reference in relation to what happened with FTX are a good example. And if the US government decides, well, we're banning Bitcoin, and River, now you're a terrorist organization or whatever, well, then that probably will change people's opinion on things as well. So, I think the simple fact, well, perhaps the solution is to optimize all available options so that, come what may, people are able to maximize the benefit of this asset and any, service providers that layer on top of it.
This is the biggest sort of like change that happened, the paradigm change that Bitcoin brought, right? We now have a sort of common layer, a common protocol, right? That's why Nostr is also cool. But Bitcoin is a common protocol with interchangeable solutions, right? for wallets is like you take your seed and you go to the other competitor if you don't like what I have, right? For you guys, it's like, I can just go and find a different Bitcoin supplier, right? It's the same Bitcoin, right? And the Bitcoin is withdrawable, right?
Mhm.
And this was not true ever for anything related to finance, right? You open your bank account in a traditional bank, you can't just go and take $1 million out of the bank in a duffel bag. They won't even let you, right? They're going to give you a voucher, right? A money order, or say if they're nice enough because they kick you out, they'll let you do it via wire, right? But you still have to go to another financial institution. So you're still captured in their system, right? There is no open protocol for you to just sort of take it and go home if you want to. So just by the sheer fact that Bitcoin makes everybody replaceable, everybody's just a client value add on top of Bitcoin, right? Everybody's replaceable. It keeps everybody honest to a better degree. We're going to have a lot of scammers, but everybody still has to give it back in that original protocol unit of account, right? Or they get immediately terminated, right? That's why FTX was still allowing withdrawals up until the last moment that they couldn't anymore, right? They were still having to be honest to a certain extent, while like try to get your shares back from Enron or something. Like try to when Robinhood rugged everybody with the GameStop, right? They literally removed the sell button because you're still captured,
Yeah.
right? And Bitcoin changes that.
Totally. That's one of the cool things I think is going to emerge with, DIDs and having an identity that you can take from one place and port to another place without any loss. Well, without as much loss of the data associated with your identity, and it's kind of a similar dynamic where you're captured by those various platforms and you don't have a fungible thing to take with you if you go somewhere else. And, perhaps we're entering an era where your identity is more, I don't know if fungible is the right word, but transportable, and you can take
Transportable,
things.
yeah.
Yeah. Gents, we're at time, and I know it's week of Christmas, so you probably have lots of family and work stuff to clue up before the big day. So we'll shut it down. Thanks for doing this. I put this together purely, I know you're actually both supporters of the show, and I appreciate that, but it was really just, when I do these group shows, I put together people that I think would be, just jive well based on personality and interest and that kind of stuff. And there are actually a bunch of more topics like ancient Amazonian civilizations and things like that I want to crack into with you guys. But why don't we put a pin in it, and maybe we'll do this again in 3 to 6 months time, and we'll try to rope Matt in.
Let's do it.
All right, guys.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for your
great.
time. Have a great Christmas, and speak to you in the new year.
Bye.
Take care, guys.
Yeah.